In every community, there are stories that rarely get told. They aren't always written in textbooks or remembered in big history lessons. Instead, they live quietly among us, in the lives of veterans who once served their country in ways most people never see. As students, we often learn about wars through dates, battles, and famous leaders. But behind every conflict are thousands of individuals, each with their own experiences and their own roles. While working on this documentary, I spoke with local veterans from many different backgrounds. What became quickly clear was the incredible diversity of the jobs they held while serving. Many people imagine military service as one thing: infantry on the front lines. But the reality is far more complex. The veterans I interviewed served many different roles. Some worked in logistics, keeping supplies moving. Others interpreted code, operated communication systems, flew aircraft, or operated mortars. Each role was different, but every one of them played an important part in the larger mission. These are people who once left this community to serve somewhere far away, and eventually returned with stories, experiences, and perspectives that most of us have never heard. This documentary shares some of those stories, because here in our community, the people with the most extraordinary experiences are often the ones living the most ordinary lives. And around here, we know them as local legends.
My name is Tony Yakas, and I was a E5 sergeant in the United States Army, and I served from active duty 92 to 96, and I was in the reserves or inactive reserves for the rest of the time till 1999.
John E. Worthen. I was in the Navy, and I was a full lieutenant.
John C. Razor, Sergeant C5.
My name is John Foster, United States Army. While I was in Vietnam, I attained the rank of E5, or a buck sergeant.
My name is Edwin Stage. I joined the military in November of 1950. My rank when I was discharged was Airman First Class.
Charles Horvath. From 1977 to 2009, I was a chaplain and retired as a lieutenant colonel.
What motivated you to join the military?
I had to chuckle when I saw that question because I was actually drafted. At the time, I just didn't want to go on to college, and if you were in college at that time, you could get a deferment, and that way you couldn't get drafted. So I guess I knew I was probably going to get drafted, but like I said, I didn't want to go to college at that time, and they had a lottery system, and they would assign your birthday to a lottery number, and my birthday was pick number 19. So the lower the number, the more sure you were probably going to go into the service. So probably the first thing I ever won in my life was a low lottery number.
Well, first time around, I was getting a C in organic chemistry at college, and that wasn't going to get me into medical school. So I decided to do something different and enlisted in the Air Force as a chance to take a time out and rethink where I was and what I was doing. So that was the immediate answer. Both my parents served during World War II, and military was always an option at different points in my life.
I was drafted. I didn't want to go. I was drafted. In fact, my wife was pregnant, and I just wanted to stay home long enough so the child was born, and they wouldn't let me. And I had my appendix removed, and that way I got to stay out until I healed up from that, and then I went into the service, drafted into the service.
How old were you when you got drafted?
20.
Can you tell me about your training and what it was like when you first joined?
Well, I signed up really in Arkansas, and then I didn't pass the physical because I had a ear infection. So I came back to Indianapolis where my sister lived. I'd worked up here before, and I worked a couple of months, and then decided I'd join the Air Force again. And so I did do that, and took the physical, and the infection was gone, so they would accept me. First, we had basic training, which was 6 weeks, and they sent us down to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, and when we got there, they had too many people. So after they'd, given us haircuts, GI haircuts, which left it very short, and given us clothing and everything, and separated us into what they call flights, and the flights made up squadrons. Anyway, they did all of that, and then they decided they were going to have to move us. So in a day or two, they put us, the people I was with, mostly from Indianapolis, they put us on buses and took us to Shepherd Air Force Base, way out in West Texas at Wichita Falls. And in our training, it seemed to me that we did an awful lot of marching and learning how to march, learning how to drill, what have you. Quite a bit of lecturing to go along with it. Then we had about a week, I think. In the Air Force, we didn't do quite as much firearm training, say, as the Army did. We did have to go to the rifle range, and you had to qualify as a sharpshooter. You didn't have to qualify as an expert, but if you could qualify, when you qualified, I should say, as a sharpshooter, well, then that was all of the arms training that you really got. And I know, people such as myself who maybe had fired a lot of firearms in my lifetime before I went there, it was easy enough to, qualify as a sharpshooter. So it was just like one day on the rifle range for me. A lot of people, it was for maybe a week or so. And you had to do that before you could move on. And just like I say, lots of marching, obstacle course, that, and just different obstacles. Not really some of the things I've seen on television that people in the Army do seem to be a lot more so than what we did in the Air Force. I don't think they were planning for us to be doing a lot of physical type things. It was going to be, I suppose, mostly either flying or working in the offices or something like that.
Basic training was at Fort Knox. I went down there in February. It was a little cold at that time. All the classrooms that you were jammed into were heated with coal stoves, so it's like 89 degrees. And they had you on the go all the time, and anytime you were sitting still in a hot room, you were fighting sleep. You were just tired all the time. And it was just some classroom work, but most of your basic training is physical training. So you do all kinds of calisthenics, and it was just gearing you for, at the end of your training cycle, you had they called it a PT course, and you had to do different things in so many minutes, or if you didn't, then they would recycle you and keep training you until you could pass and everything. So I was thrown in with, at that time when you're drafted, the Army was taking everybody, and I grew up in Cowan, Indiana. I'd never really seen any of the world or anything, and there were people from all over the United States, different nationalities, and we were just a melting pot, and you quickly learned to work together, and you just made the best of it that you could. So
how challenging was your basic training? Did you find it extremely difficult, or how far did it push you?
I was always pretty athletic in high school and everything, and also I was in the Boy Scouts, so I was used to being out in the elements and everything. And there was no doubt about it. The training was hard, but it wasn't anything I couldn't handle or anything. And I was, like most, you're just proud you made it through it and everything. Whatever they threw at it, we were able to do it. And so I'm just proud to have gone through that. So.
Well, we went into Camp Butner in North Carolina, and then we went on maneuvers in Tennessee, and left a lot of big tracks down there. We were together as a 78th Infantry Artillery attached, and there was A, B, and C battery that had 105 howitzers, and the shell weighed 96 pounds. With the fuse, it weighed 100 pounds. And the order came down that they needed infantry people, so they burst up the entire outfit and sent the privates and the PFCs overseas as replacements for the people who were injured and so on and so forth. Well, don't ask me why, but they made me a T5 corporal and kept me, and I didn't have to go with that outfit. But they installed the battery division and so on, and we went through training the second time, and then we all went over as a group.
Today, the United States Armed Forces are made up of roughly 1.3 million active duty service members. These are the individuals currently serving, training, deployed, and standing ready across the globe. But that number only tells part of the story. Over the course of American history, an estimated 41 million people have served our country. 41 million lives, each one representing a decision to serve something greater than themselves. That means that behind every branch, every base, and every mission, there's a legacy. Generations of individuals who stepped forward in times of peace and in times of war. The military we see today isn't just built on strategy or strength. It's built on people, on decades of service, sacrifice, and commitment that continues to shape what it means to serve. What was your role or job while you served?
I was an electronic warfare specialist, focused on Arabic. So my job was to listen to people speak, whether it's communications through radio, telephone, whatever, and then we would direction find them. Well, we translate it, then we would direction, and we'd also be direction finding them, and then we would decide whether or not we needed to jam the signal, launch something to take them out, or just continue to listen. That was what I was trained to do.
Chaplain breaks down into four main areas. One is preaching and formal roles, like they'd have an invocation at the start of an event. Two was preaching the sermons on a Sunday. Three was counseling. And four was working with unit commanders when they would have a problem. Because a lot of times if a commander has a good relationship with the chaplain, everything I do is off the record. Everything I do can't be formally evaluated. So if he had a problem with a person and didn't want to have a court-martial or go through the legal channels, he'd call me first and say, let me see what we can do. And I would work off the record to find the best possible answers. So I'd work with the commander, the person, often with the JAGs, the Judge Advocate Corps, and we'd work at finding different answers to resolve problems.
I was kind of favored a little bit. I was in the motor pool, and I was a truck driver, or car driver, or Jeep driver, and it wound up that I did a lot of driving for the commanding officer of the battery. And I therefore did not have to take a lot of the 4-mile hikes that they were taking at that time. And I thought I was a little bit favored, but I don't know why. But I got along well with the cadre, with the officers.
After basic training, you'd been given aptitude tests and IQ tests and things when you first signed up, and they asked you what you wanted to do. And I decided I wanted to be a radio operator. It was one of the absolute longest school the Air Force had, and I was not in a hurry to get in combat. So I said I would like to be a radio operator, and apparently I had the qualifications to go to radio school. It was a 32-week school in Biloxi, Mississippi. So I went to that school for 32 weeks. There we learned International Morse code. You had 28 weeks to get to where you could copy and send 20 words a minute. And I managed to do that in 15, so if you could do it early, they let you out of classes. So I had half days off for, another 13 weeks, which was nice. After that, they were going to assign you to something, and they asked you what you wanted to do. Well, most of us wanted to be flight operators, and they had flight operators or ground operators, or they had what they call intercept operators. And the flight operators, well, actually the intercept operators, they took the people who did best in school and made intercept operators out of them. And what that entailed was, I can tell you at this time, I couldn't when I was in the service or 10 years afterward, but that was, you're going to be doing secret work, you're going to be copying Russian code or Chinese code. So we were kind of watching what they were doing even back in the 50s. So actually, they put me in that school, so I went to another school in Biloxi, still training, two more, let's see, that was a 2-week school there. And then the main intercept operator school was in Brooks Field in San Antonio again, and that was a 13-week school. So they sent me over there, and you couldn't tell anybody what you were doing or anything else there. And so when I finished that school, then they gave us a month off, and they were going to send you overseas so that you could start doing your interceptor. They didn't. They said, they gave us 3 choices. They said you could either go to Germany or Alaska or Japan. And if you went to Alaska, that was as short as it was going to be a 12-month tour of duty. And if you went to Germany, it was, I think it was, might have been 24 months. If you went to Japan, it was 30 months. And most of us asked for Germany, and then they sent us where they wanted us to go. So I was sent to Japan, which was the longest one. And so there, I was supposed to be there 30 months. And What we did was, as I say, we were copying. Copied a little Chinese code, but mostly I chose, look, you didn't just copy it. They put you had a station. There would be about, I think, around 20 of us on a shift. And we worked 8-hour shifts. And we had 2 receivers. And we would search for Russian code, actually, wherever they might be. And we would copy it. We didn't really, we could, it was international code, so we could copy it, but we didn't really know what it said. Somebody else had to break the code. It was, I would say it was, pretty stressful, because you're searching, and sometimes it was so you could hardly hear the code because it was so far away sometimes. Maybe not much picked up. So anyway, I did that, and I did that, well, until time to come home.
Where were you stationed, and what was daily life like there?
Again, I mentioned, BASIC and AIT. The year in Vietnam, I flew in, it was called Cam Ranh Bay. I had to report to Fort Lewis, Washington, and after maybe 3 or 4 days there, we stopped in Anchorage, Alaska to refuel. We flew into Yokota Air Force Base in Japan, again to refuel, and then on into Cam Ranh Bay. And the one thing I'll say is, immediately when you get to Vietnam, I can't begin to describe how hot and humid it was. I mean, it had to have been over 100 degrees and 100% humidity, and that's the thing that hits you right. It's just this wall of heat, and just the thoughts of, I'm going to be spending a year in this environment, it got your attention very, very quickly. But as they were saying, misery loves company. We were all in the same boat. None of us knew what to expect when we got there, and you just made the best of it and hope that things are going to turn out right. So,
Enlisted, I was in northern Maine and then Thailand during the Vietnam War, finally ending up in Texas. And then as a chaplain, I've been all over the country. Everything from Pease Air Force Base up in New Hampshire to Vandenberg, finished up at Seymour Johnson. And I also had a number of special tours, whether it was working with the headquarters of the Civil Air Patrol at Maxwell, working at Lackland with the basic training units, and finally the Dover Port Mortuary, where all the fallen heroes came back from Iraq and Afghanistan.
What we did was we flew on that East Coast area, and we had targets where we could practice the bombing and strafing and rocket drops. But we also learned to fly in divisions of 4. So we did most of what we did in training was to take off and join 3 other planes, so that there were 4 of us, and then we did something. We went someplace. We either were learning to navigate better, and we came back, and sometimes we made several landings. Other times we would be firing, we'd be dropping bombs or practicing strafing. And I was going to say that in the second year that I was there, in the month of, just like we've been through here in the last few weeks, it was the weather was really a problem, and being able to get in the air and do what we needed to do. So we went to Cuba, and we went to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, which is on the far end of the eastern part of Cuba. And it's a huge, big base right at the end of the island. And we have, there's housing there, there's officers' BOQs, there's landing strip, and a lot of training goes on year-round from Guantanamo Bay, particularly with destroyers, the ships, and planes working together to deal with submarines and that sort of thing. But we were able to go down for about 6 weeks in January and February and do nothing but work on armaments. We dropped bombs, or we did strafing, or we fired rockets, and of course we made this half Cuban aid, thousands of times. And by the way, you would come in on the deck and pull up, and at the top you'd be at 1,900 feet, and then you'd roll out and go back down, and then we got into a pattern, a racetrack pattern, and 4 or 5 airplanes would work on dropping this bomb.
So in Monterey, that was the Defense Language Institute. I would get up in the mornings and go to school, and then in the afternoon I did physical training. Once I graduated from language school, I went to Goodfellow Air Force Base, where we did shift work for training, either days or nights, and you just did your physical training either before or after. And then once I got to the infantry unit, Mondays were maintenance days. You had physical training every day, but Mondays you did maintenance on everything. Tuesdays you're usually fixing stuff, going to the range or something else to fire weapons. Usually on Thursdays you were training, and then Fridays you were cleaning. So, and you spent usually at least a week of every month, sometimes 2 weeks of every month in the field. That would be go out. You might leave on a Monday, come back on a Thursday, and then you'd be off Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, maybe the next Tuesday, depending on how many days you're in the field.
What are some of your most vivid memories from your time in service?
Well, they come down to 3 different categories. First, when I was enlisted, I really liked working on the B-52s. They were big, and I thought beautiful planes, and autopilot, we were all over them, from being on top where the astro compass has to be mounted to all the gear inside. And when I was at Guam, I still remember I was on top of a B-52, and they'd had a ceremony where they drafted a whole bunch of people from different units to stand at attention and watch a big parade. And so there I am in my t-shirt, sweating like anything, looking over the wing of the 52 to where they were all standing at attention and thinking how glad I was I had a job to do. Didn't get stuck doing that. As a chaplain, there were certain times when I would be doing counseling. And I always started out with, how can I help? And normally it would be relational issues like marriage counseling, or I didn't like my work situation. And I'd go through some very standard things about working through it. And it would eventually come to a point where I'd say, well, these are the other agencies that can help you, but if you want to go deeper with me, the answer would involve my faith in Jesus and what that relationship is. And if they wanted to continue, great. If not, the nice thing about a chaplain is that it wasn't denominational, and many of the people that saw me saw the cross as a confidential counselor, because I couldn't reveal what was said and nobody could ask me. And so it was helping people, whether or not it actually became religious.
Yeah.
Other than that, there were just little things in life. I remember some of the events where I would help a commander. In fact, one of my favorite stories was a airman who'd gotten in trouble, and I went to the judge advocate's office and was talking with a lawyer about it. And I said to him, we've got like maybe 124 articles in the UCMJ. We could throw them all out and just make it a crime to be stupid. And he laughed. He said, yeah, but then we'd have nobody left in the Air Force. So there were a lot of times when there was a lot of humor in it. Other than that, the big thing for me was all the different times that I was deployed, Becky would have the 3 kids. And this is back before Garmin. And all the stories she'd have where she'd pile them into the station wagon and she'd drive until she got lost and then ask somebody for directions on how to get to the next key landmark for taking them to visit the grandparents or something like that. So a lot of people don't realize, but when you're deployed, your wife is actually paying a higher price. In fact, it's interesting when we go to a restaurant, we both got retiree cards. Hers is a dependent card, but most of the places just give her like the 10% discount for a meal or something. And I really think that, the spouses earn it. So when we come back, I'd say all the things I did, and then she'd say all the things she survived.
I think probably being in the field, because you're with people 24/7, sometimes for a month at a time, and so you get really close. You learn a lot about each other. You learn what they like, what they dislike. You figure out what annoys you about them, and what annoys them, or what annoys how you annoy them. You figure out all that stuff, but you get to be pretty close. So, and I was lucky. I went to language school and pretty much through with a similar group. So most of my friends I was at language school with, they might have been in my class or one before me or after me. And then we ended up at Fort Stewart, Georgia together. So we were all really close. So there was 5 teams, so probably 20 linguists or translators or the same job as me in there. And we just had a lot of fun.
Well, when we had any lull, there was generally a bowling alley or something that we would occupy or confiscate or something, and we had a bowling alley in the building that we occupied until it made too much noise or interference with the kitchen, and they eliminated that. But I enjoyed that. Duck Pin Bowling Alley. They were small. Yeah. But I don't remember anything that I really enjoyed.
We were flying about 300 miles off of the coast of North Carolina, and it was a beautiful day, and 4 of us were scheduled to take off and join together and do something out there. We were getting ready to go on a cruise in about 3 months, and we were training, maybe it was 2 months, we were training for that, and working with the carrier called the USS Intrepid, and learning to work with the ship. And it was many of our first experiences with going to be on a carrier for a long time, and so we were training, and I was number 2 taking off, and the executive officer was lieutenant commander, and he was the leader, and we were making we were not being shot off by the mechanism that fired you. So we were making carrier takeoffs by moving further back. They moved us further back than when we were fired off with the catapult. And we could make a deck launch. It's called a deck launch. And so you run up the engine to full bore, hold the brakes, And when it was clear, you had a landing signal officer outside that you were looking at, and whenever he gave you the signal, you launched. And I launched following the leader who was just out in the air. I could see him, and I rotated as I got to the bow of the carrier, I rotated the craft up just slightly for takeoff angle and flew off. And then the stick that was had lots of tension in it because you were holding the stick and you're flying, and the wings. It moved the wings, the tail structures, and all of that came back in my lap. And what happened was the cables that hold all of this somehow broke. We couldn't figure. I've never heard of another plane this happening. And Douglas, that made the plane, said it couldn't happen. But anyway, the stick was back in my lap, and it's just like the steering wheel as you're making a turn or something. It has tension in it, and you're holding it, but all of a sudden it goes around and around. It has no tension in it. And so what happened is I flew off, and my left wing dropped, big heavy engine dropped through, and I plunged into the water. And the carrier was behind me, but I was thinking about a lot of things, like what did I do that I shouldn't have done, or what should I have done that I didn't somehow think about doing. And as I hit the water, it was in about that angle, and there was a huge splash, and I thought that I had turned over and I was going underwater. And when I undid the buckle of my shoulder straps and my belt strap, and I stood up, and I was in the water about up to my chest. So it didn't go over. So I was able to step out on the wing, pop the Mae West, so I had some that you always wore whenever you were flying, just for this reason, and went out into the water. And the carrier kept coming along, but the lieutenant was in charge of the carrier at that point, and I heard him talking about this. He kicked the stern back one way and then back the other way, and was able to make sure that the carrier didn't run over me and the plane. So there's a helicopter involved every time there's landings or takeoffs. And so as soon as the carrier actually even before the carrier got, the helicopter came in and dropped this hook, which I could get hold of, and it would pull me up. But it was just about 3 feet away, and I just couldn't. I swam to try to get to it, and I couldn't get to it. And he was concerned that the carrier was the canted deck was going to interfere with his helicopter. So he left and let the ship go by, and then he came back in and dropped the hook and got me out. And I was 8 minutes from takeoff to back on the carrier, and I was not hurt at all. I had some bruises under my knees, where my knees flew up and hit the areas in the pilot seat, where and that was about all that was wrong with me. Anyway, they took me to sick bay, and they looked at me and said, are you hurt anyway? Anything hurt? I said no, and they said, take this pill. So I took it, and I was out. It was something that put me completely out. And the next thing I knew, it was morning, and the executive officer, who was the leader, was at my side and said, how are you feeling? I said, I'm feeling fine, but we lost that airplane. And he said, yeah, he said, well, get up and get dressed. We're going to fly today. So I got up and we flew, and that was fine. So that was probably the most crazy thing that happened during my flying experience. So.
Over the course of our country's history, we have fought in over 200 conflicts and declared war 11 times. Each time, servicemen and women have had to step up, leaving behind their homes, their families, and the lives they knew, to answer a call greater than themselves. From the very beginning in the American Revolutionary War, ordinary individuals took extraordinary risks to fight for an idea, freedom, independence, and a nation that had yet to fully exist. That spirit didn't end there. It carried forward through generations, across centuries, and into conflicts that would shape the world. While many wars have gone undeclared, the last time the United States formally declared war was during World War II. A conflict that demanded unity, sacrifice, and resilience on a global scale. Even after that, the nature of warfare changed, but the burden placed on those who serve did not. In this documentary, we hear from veterans whose experiences span decades of that history, from World War II all the way to 1996. Though the conflicts may differ, their stories are connected by a shared sense of duty, sacrifice, and service. Behind every number, every war, every conflict is a person, a story, a life interrupted or forever changed. These aren't just moments in history, they are lived experiences carried by the men and women who stood up when they were needed most. Did you build lasting friendships during your time in the military?
You lose contact, but Facebook's brought a lot of it back. But I've got a couple of people I was with language school all the way through that I still am in contact with, and we see each other every couple of years.
Well, one in particular, there was a fellow, he was from Boston, but after he retired, he moved to San Diego. And he and I, we were very good friends from radio school on, and we kept in touch till, I'd say about 10 years ago, and then he he got dementia, and he didn't know me. So, yeah.
You know, at the time, we all said we will never forget each other. And I remember most of the guys I was with. But one of the things that happened when you got back from Vietnam for the first year, you'd call your buddies and everything. And I called Billy Roden, and here's a typical conversation. Hey, Billy, it's Johnny. And hey, Johnny, how you doing? And you'd say, you talk for 2 or 3 minutes, and all of a sudden you realize, I don't really know this person now, because the one thing we had in common, we're in Vietnam together. But once you got home, got back into your own life, most people just start living their own life, and you realize you didn't have a whole lot to talk about and everything. And sooner or later, the call just got fewer and fewer, and everybody just got on with their own lives and everything. So I've got a couple of guys that I get in touch with periodically. One guy's out in California, but we all got on with our lives, and so not real long-lasting relationships. So
I had a very good friend, in fact, 2 very good friends. One was a air intelligence officer in a nearby squadron, not my squadron, but a nearby squadron. But we lived together with 4 of us lived together, and he was one of them. And he's still living, not in great health, but he's living in Potomac, Maryland, which is just on the edge of the district of Washington, D.C. And another was, he got very interested in the master's degree that I had taken just before coming into the Navy. And when he got out of the Navy, I stayed in touch with him. He got out of the Navy. He went to the same program that I went to in New York City, at Columbia, and then went to a doctoral program in Michigan, and I had gone to a doctoral program at Harvard, and we both became university presidents, and so we talked about that quite a bit. But he died a few years ago. Those are two people that I had wonderful memories of. Interesting. In the last year that I was at Oceana, Virginia, one of the guys in the squadron, we got together and decided, you could live, single men could live in the BOQ, or you could live off campus, off of the base. But you had to pay for that, of course. And he and I rented a house in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So we lived together for a year in Virginia Beach, and we were in the same squadron, and we flew some together, and so he was really a great friend. We got out of the Navy, and I went to Washington, D.C., and very shortly after that, I learned that he had died. He had a heart attack somehow. It's just crazy, but I think he was singing in a choir or something. And so it was he was a great friend during the time, and I'm sure would have been a person that I stayed in touch with for a long time, because we had a house together. So just a sad thing about that. But others, one good friend who I liked a lot he was in a different squadron someplace in the Northeast, and somehow I think crashed an airplane and died. Anyway, probably the ones that I mentioned, the guy who became a president actually it was a university in Detroit, a private university, and then the one who was an air intelligence officer that I mentioned is still living in Potomac, Maryland. But I'm 92, so some of these guys who were good friends, didn't last that long. So,
what were some of the biggest challenges you faced while serving?
Most of them would be you're trying to balance the life of being a soldier along with your personal life, and that's difficult. My parents divorced when I was in, so I had to deal with that. I deployed to the Middle East once, to Jordan, came back, didn't deploy to Egypt because they were getting divorced, and then almost deployed to Haiti one time also. Actually almost deployed to Somalia. So there's just different, the stress of all that is just, you're trying to balance everything. And, at that point we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have internet, so we could leave in the middle of the night and my parents wouldn't know I was gone. I mean, because once you knew you were going somewhere, you couldn't call anybody, you couldn't do anything, and so sometimes your parents wouldn't even know that you were leaving. Nowadays, you can communicate a lot more, but back then, when I was in Jordan, I called my mom. I think I was given a phone card to make one phone call to her when I was over there, and then we ended up getting pulled out of the country pretty fast because of something going on in Iraq. So I ended up coming back pretty quickly, but usually you go somewhere and you're contacting your family, and so that's probably the most difficult part of it.
I would say one of the biggest challenges was that shift change at work, because it messed you up on your sleep and it messed you up on your eating. When we got off at midnight, we would eat, and so I think that was the biggest challenge. Actually, the rest of it, you're just doing your job, working, and that was.
Hassel, Germany was the biggest. and that's the one that we wound up in, and it was almost annihilated, and it was a railroad terminal. There was tracks all over the town. There was a hospital there. We weren't allowed to. It was about the only thing that was left of that town, to be honest with you. But we were, the Forward Observer picked a place for us to live, and we lived on Adolf Hitler Street. I suppose just to aggravate him, I don't know. But we met some of the people there that they were very nice. They were very friendly, very cooperative. But I never kept any relationship as far as that's concerned. I was invited back over there years later, and a friend of mine wanted me to go with him, and he went, but I didn't go. I was married and had a daughter and had a job, and I didn't think I had any business over there.
How did your service impact your life after returning home?
Well, it really opened my eyes to a broader world. I saw a lot of the world when I was in the service. When I was in Vietnam, I took an R&R to Sydney, Australia. I took a 7-day leave to Hong Kong, and just being stationed in the different states and everything, but just more meeting a variety of different people. And when I was in Vietnam, a lot of the soldiers, they didn't have a whole lot of sympathy for the Vietnamese people, because we're out in the countryside and we're going into these little villages, and all these people had was their rice. They grew rice, and that's how they existed and everything. And I guess it was just the way I was raised, but I couldn't help but feel sorry for them, because they just didn't really seem to have a whole lot. And I think it gave me a passion for the downtrodden, and especially through church. I've gone on some missions through church, and again, just to experience people that have nothing but still they seem to have a lot of happiness in their life. And I tell everybody, it just created a perspective for me that I'll never forget. It just has served me even to today and everything. So,
Well, I guess it had well, for one thing, what I did in life afterward, it impacted it. I probably, had I not gone in the service, I probably would never have gone to college, and ended up in the occupation I did, and with the family I had, and because I actually didn't have the money to go to school, and when I got out of the service, they, if we wanted to go to school, I think it was $117 a month they would give us to pay our way, and that just about did it. And I think that was probably the afterlife, the biggest impact, I would say, because that affected my entire life, what I ended up doing.
What was your job after you got out of the service?
I studied accounting in school, got a degree in accounting, and I became a CPA, and eventually owned my own company. Well, owned it with some partners.
Well, I never returned home. I guess I left and never went back. I kind of used that as my starting point, and so I entered the military from Montana, where my dad was stationed. He still lives there. And so what it led me was I probably would have never graduated college if I hadn't gone to the military. I learned 80% of what you need to know you can learn in about 20% of the time you do something. So if you want to be an expert, It's that last 20% that takes you 80% of the time to get there. So learning that you can learn 80% of what you need to know in about 20% of the time, which is how the military tends to do things, and that works for about 95% of the things you do in life. So once I figured that has probably done the most for me, because I know that if I need to learn something new, that I can learn about 80% of what I need to know about that subject in a very short period of time. And that's helped me go through different career fields. I've been in the military, I've been in running distribution centers since then, I've been in management consulting, I've been purchasing goods for people, and then I've been in this world, financial services. So I've been able to really go into any world and any job and figure it out quickly because I understand that concept.
What do you want people today to understand about your time in service?
This may be an odd one, but I'm not a big fan of thank you for your service. I served, I enjoyed my service, I felt like I was making a difference and I'm proud of it. But those who are in the service knew what it was. And for people who've never experienced it, say, oh, we thank you for your service. Well, okay, I guess thank you for saying thank you, but you weren't there, you don't know. And again, I didn't suffer any. I mean, it's not like I was shot or have PTSD or anything. And it's just, I'm proud of what I did. And by the way, I like the 10% off at some of the restaurants. But I keep it, to myself and to other people who are military. Because, we can talk shop. But there's that link of people who have lived it in one way or another, as opposed to those who, while they appreciate in general, have absolutely no concept of what I did, or whether I was good or whether I made mistakes, and so on.
I don't know if it's my time or everybody's time, but I think everybody leaves something or loses something of themselves and they gain something in the military. No matter if you went to combat or not, you're in stressful situations. You go in field problems and soldiers die. We had a death during one of our field problems. The Abrams turned over into about 2 feet of water and it killed 4 people inside of it. And so everybody in usually leaves something of themselves, and you get a little bit of, I don't know if it's trauma coming from it, but you're just different after you do it. Most people I know that were in the military, they're kind of no nonsense now. They just, even like you get into the corporate world, you can tell who's been in the military. They're just not into the games and stuff usually. So I think but I think people have to understand that, no matter who serves, they do come out a changed person. And usually that's for the good. But they've probably seen something, even if they haven't been to combat, they've probably seen something that they don't ever want to see again. In many cases, at least in the Army. The Air Force, I don't know, my dad had to face accidents too, and I think that's just the hard part of it. You're in I was on a base of 20,000 soldiers, so it's like a little town, and there's the same problems that they have in the civilian world, though it gets amplified.
I'm happy to talk about it, and I'm happy to know that some people are getting that experience, and I think it's basically good for most people. I mean, it was different for me. It was fun and games the whole time. I mean, we were training to get into battle, but we never had to. I think the ROTC programs in universities is a good program, and I think for the right in the right situation, it's good for people to be able to have the military experience.
It's all that question that one thing I want people to, I wasn't a hero, and I make no bones. If I would have, if somebody said you can either go or not, I would not have chosen to have gone to Vietnam. But having gone and survived it, there's nothing next to being a husband and a parent. There's nothing I'm more proud of in my life. But I come, like I say, I come from a long line of patriots. My dad and uncles, they were in World War II. My grandfather was in the Spanish-American War. My other grandfather was in World War I. My brother served in the Navy, several cousins in the service, and it's just kind of what we did. And you know, that your country asked you to do something, and we did it. And there were times, like I say, if I'd had the choice, I might not, I certainly wouldn't have chosen to go to Vietnam, but I went, I came back, and I'm very proud of it and everything. So,
Looking back on your military service, if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Get it in writing. I mean, when you go in, there's so many things you get promised. And my dad was in, so most of mine came true, but there's certain things that, you know, they end up getting pulled from you and stuff. You know, I would say make sure you get stuff in writing. But probably the other thing would be, you know, when you're going into it, I think understanding your career path and what you want to do is important, and maybe that's more advice for somebody that's looking to go in today. And understand that when you go in, whatever career you choose, how's that going to translate into something in the civilian world at some point? Because some people that I went to, I don't think everybody did that. And so when you look at everybody that went through school with me, you know, one of my old roommates got out and he ended up back in like 10 years later because he had nothing going on in his life. So I think if you go in, you have to know if it's pretty quickly if you want it as a career or not. And if you don't, then what's your path then going out and trying to do something in this world and create something for yourself?
you know, I've often thought about this, but at the time they were giving like $10,000 bonuses for people that would re-enlist, and I've often wondered. I was even recruited to go to West Point, and at the time, I just wanted to get out of the service. I wanted to go home and everything. And I've often wondered, what if I would have stayed in and done 20 years, invested the $10,000 and came out with an education. I've been curious how that would have changed my life today and everything. At the time, the military offered a lot of opportunities, but it was just that period, it was just a horrible time in the country, and like most people, we just wanted to get out and everything, so.
This year marks 250 years of the United States of America. 2.5 centuries of history, of growth, struggle, progress, and perseverance. Generations have come and gone, each leaving their mark on the nation we know today. This year, we say, Happy birthday, America. To everyone who calls this nation home, from every background and walk of life, thank you for being a part of its story. Here in our own community, that story lives on through the veterans around us. Their service, their sacrifices, and their experiences are a direct connection to something much larger than ourselves. From its founding to today, America has been shaped by people willing to step forward, to build it, to protect it, and to believe in it. 250 years later, the story is still being written.
Thank you for your time doing this interview, and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for the time for the interview, and thank you for your service.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for your service. Thank you very much for your time in doing all this, and thank you very much for your service.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for your service.
The stories you've just heard are only a small glimpse into the lives of the veterans in our community. For every story shared, there are countless others that remain untold. Moments of challenge, sacrifice, growth, and pride that have shaped who these individuals are today. What stands out most is not just what they did, but who they became because of it. Their experiences didn't end when they returned home. They carried them forward into their everyday lives, into their families, their careers, and into the community. It's easy to overlook the people around us, to pass by without realizing the depth of their experiences. But behind familiar faces are histories filled with responsibility, resilience, dedication, and service. This documentary isn't about the past. It's about the lessons they have learned and the wisdom they have shared, and how we can use it to shape our future. It's about taking a moment to see the people in our own community for who they truly are, and to understand that extraordinary stories don't only exist in history books. They exist right here and are walking among us. While my documentary focuses on veterans, these lessons I've learned apply to all. So the next time you see a neighbor, a teacher, a coworker, or a friend, remember, you are most likely looking at someone who has lived a story worth telling, and someone worth having a conversation with. These servicemen who I had the privilege to interview shaped my understanding of what it means to serve our country. Their sacrifices and wisdom are inspiring, because here in our community, they're more than veterans. They're our local legends.